9 years ago, in late 2016, a Reddit post was made in r/UnsolvedMysteries, asking the question, who is Joe1orbit? This would go on to unearth one of the internet's earliest and most bizarre rabbit holes, involving a grotesque film, a disturbed individual, and possibly even the involvement of the FBI. This is the disturbing rabbit hole of internet user Joe1orbit.
This tape will end in 2 seconds.
Hello all. In 1996, a person named Joe1orbit began posting on Usenet in the true crime section. The posts basically supported murders and shamed society. I don't really know how to describe them. The poster then goes on to give links to various blogs that existed nearly 20 years prior. Now, if you're under the age of 57 and not currently living in a retirement home, you probably have no idea what Usenet even is. Usenet was basically a popular online social network that allowed others to communicate through the internet back in the 80s and 90s, until Google Groups acquired part of these posts. What's important here is that all of Joe1orbit's messages and posts have been archived on Google Groups, and are still available to view right now. Joe1orbit, or Joe, posted long detailed reports of pretty heinous crimes across the world to a true crime section of Usenet. However, alongside that, he'd also give his own opinions on each case, and he weirdly sided with the perpetrator of said crime, usually finding a way to blame society or literally anybody other than the person who actually did it. In March of 2000, Joe1orbit would make a post talking about the Robert Wayne Harris case that had just unfolded a few days prior, where Harris went on a spree at his former workplace. The guy was clearly a menace to society, though Joe1orbit would go on to have a different perspective. Immediately after his arrest, he confessed. Very foolish tactical decisions on Robert's part. The bottom line is, whether or not Robert is consciously aware of it or not, his rage stems from the lifetime of beginning in childhood that he has endured, and these two separate explosions were simply the result of his lifetime torment, finally rising up to the surface. As Joe1orbit made his posts consistently on Usenet, individuals looking into the strange person behind the account found striking similarities between both Joe and a man only known as Full Force Frank.
My name is Frank. My name is Frank, man. I'm the editor of Singing Those Antipsychotic Blues. You dig it? I'm gonna kill people because my reality tells me that this is the thing to do. I say, I got. You dig it? That's what I gotta do.
In 1996, an American underground filmmaker and director, Mark Haynar, would go on to release his first documentary. Titled Affliction, the film was a showcase of the wildest people Haynar could find, doing the most extreme and grotesque things. The whole 45-minute shockumentary is online, though I would highly advise not watching it, unless, of course, you want to ruin your appetite and probably your day. The film starred the likes of Gigi Allen, Mike Diana, and other unique individuals, though there was only one person that stood out: Full Force Frank, the only one who wore a mask, trying to keep his identity a secret. The man only has a few minutes of total runtime that show up as short clips throughout the film, and in that time he rants about his urges to hurt people. He says that children who grew up and are raised in very bad environments, eventually as they age and become adults, have a desire to hurt others. He talks about society and how it openly fails to protect children. You can also get the vibe that this whole thing is extremely personal to him.
The little baby has to grow up and he has to people. That's just a fact.
He brandishes certain items that YouTube wouldn't really like me to show, while continuing to talk about how society is a pretty messed up place. Years ago, some people uploaded both the clips from Affliction as well as the unedited raw cut of the footage on YouTube, so if you are curious and want to watch the full versions, those are out there and much easier to access. In the first few seconds of the footage showing Frank, text pops up on screen. Frank's zine salutes and women's, anyways, a zine is a self-published book that often dives into the creative ideas of the artist. Kinda like a mixture of a magazine and comic that uses collages and is produced on a much smaller scale. The zines in question were created by Full Force Frank between 1989 and 1991, titled Singin' Dose Antipsychotic Blues, The Mark Lapine Memorial Scrapbook, and Livin' in a Powder Keg and Givin' Off Sparks, overall consisting of 13 total issues. I could only find pages of Singin' Dose Antipsychotic Blues, which has about what you'd expect based on Frank's other activities. It gave insight into his mind with paragraphs talking about crimes, weapons, and feet? Now, don't forget about Frank because he will make an appearance later in this rabbit hole. Jumping back ahead to the Joe1orbit era, people began seeing both the zines and Affliction clips of Full Force Frank, somehow leading to a rumor spreading on Usenet that Frank and Joe1orbit were the same exact person. As far as I'm aware, there was never any actual proof of this back then, though the truth would eventually come out, confirming that Joe1orbit is in fact Full Force Frank. We'll get more into that later in this video. As time went on, Joe1orbit back in the late 90s began to be a popular name in this Usenet true crime community. He would continue to make his posts half discussing the cases of real crimes happening around the world, while the other half of it was his rants about society. Years passed until one day in the early 2000s where Joe1orbit would stop posting. This was especially bizarre considering Joe had posted thousands of times for years, and one day he just completely stops. No new accounts, no updates, nothing. In 2002, a website called ForbiddenTruth.8k.com was created. The homepage had the words, "The Manifesto of Forbidden Truth," displayed at the top, while underneath lay dozens and dozens of links, each taking you to an entire page dedicated to topics ranging from war, mortality, brainwashing, and yes, more crime. And each page is filled with paragraphs. This whole website, ForbiddenTruth.8k.com, would turn out to be the work of Joe1orbit. Since his departure from the true crime Usenet community, Joe began creating this manifesto site to better document his ideas in a more personal way. The homepage states, "This website has been created for the purpose of revealing forbidden truth. I will simply provide an example of forbidden truth, just one example among many thousands that this manifesto will ultimately reveal." Joe then speaks about how he believes society can affect a child, born into a diseased and deranged society of humans. From the instant of his conception, he is subjected to nothing but evil, insanity, derangement, unnaturalness, because that is what human society is. Insane, evil, perverse, beyond all measure. Joe states that throughout this entire manifesto, he reveals the forbidden truths about our collective false beliefs, calling them invalid, lie-based myths, delusions, and brainwashings. Throughout the website, Joe brings up various serial killers, including Charles Starkweather, Pee Wee Gaskins, Edmund Kemper, and much more. In the paragraphs following, Joe calls them philosophers of truth and martyrs created by the evils of society. Now, surprisingly enough, Joe was actually robbed. He was robbed of the Biggest Yapper of 2002 award. I mean, seriously, there are 17,000 words on this one page alone. As far as I can tell, the rest of the website is similar in theme, where he discusses his thoughts on culture, politics, animals, and stuff like that. The website, ForbiddenTruth.8k.com, doesn't work anymore, though it is available to view on the Wayback Machine. Months passed, and most people that frequented the true crime Usenet community that Joe once posted in forgot about him. Of course, there were some people who questioned his sudden disappearance, though most just moved on. Months turned into years, and Joe1orbit's name faded away. That is, until a new rumor emerged. In 2014, a blog page named Cold Case Cameron, dedicated to uncovering the truth behind the serial killer, Edward Wayne Edwards, posted a pretty wild theory. The author accuses Joe1orbit of being Edward Wayne Edwards. Edwards began blogging on Google Groups, using the name Joe1orbit and Gen1orbit, taunting the bloggers to identify him and giving his theory. Underneath is a link to a post made by Joe's first and earliest Usenet account, Gen1orbit. Titled The Undetectable Serial Killer Theory, Joe explains how he believes in the existence of basically the perfect and most calculated killer to ever exist. Someone like Dexter, who started sometime around the 1960s or 70s. Joe goes on to glaze the hell out of this supposed person, if they even exist, calling them brilliant, organized, and much more. The author of Cold Case Cameron thinks that the actual serial killer, Edward Wayne Edwards, is Joe1orbit, and he wrote this post to taunt those who read it. Under this, the author writes, "Why did Edwards choose the name Joe1orbit to blog?" and provides a link to a high-level IQ interpretation of Joe1orbit's username. Joe, an ordinary man, an ordinary Joe. 1, used to refer to a single person or thing, or number 1, the best. Orbit, the curved path of Joe1orbit, an ordinary man or father of Jesus, single person, the best, that follows a celestial path around the world killing. Okay, so the person who made this theory must have been drunk as hell, because with one quick Google search, you can see that this is all impossible. Edwards was born in 1933. Do you really think a man born in the damn Great Depression knew how to use the internet as well as Joe1orbit did? While looking for the truth and true identity of Joe1orbit, I found a post dated all the way back to late 2002, the year Joe went missing, titled Joe1orbit aka Full Force Frank. Someone named Sarah Monroe writes, "Joe has asked me to post this. He was arrested on September 12th of this year, and he is currently in jail pending arraignment. He welcomes mail from all." Sarah goes on to give Joe's alleged real name, Joseph and his P.O. box for people to send letters to. Although Sarah herself never specified what Joe was charged with, people managed to find his arrest information online. Joseph was arrested on 11 counts of fake identification on September 12th. To be clear, I haven't found any evidence of Joe's arrest now, since it's been over 20 years and records of a random case like this still online would be hard to find. Though I do believe that this Joseph is the real Joe1orbit. Sarah Monroe gives a lot of detailed information about Joe and his online shenanigans throughout this thread, and in the original post, she stated that Joe himself asked her to post this, which leads me to think that Sarah and Joe know each other pretty well. Now, in this thread, Sarah links clack.net multiple times. At first, going to this website left me confused because it's just completely innocent art, books, and music-related things. Though when you use the Wayback Machine and go to 2002, the entire site is dedicated to and likely made by Joe1orbit. Welcome to clack.net. You are invited to meet Joe1orbit by following the link on the left. Clicking forward takes you to even more links, and the text, a partial sample of Joe as Full Force Frank and other writings. More will be added in the coming days. Underneath everything is the name of allegedly the real Joe1orbit, which previously was provided by Sarah Monroe. The links provided are pages written by other people talking about Joe and Full Force Frank. 3 of the 4 are pretty boring, though one of them makes this entire rabbit hole even more disturbing. Obscure Electronic number 3 by Jim Romenesko, a journalist and writer who had a complicated connection to Joe1orbit. Keep in mind, this was in 1993, before Joe1orbit's time, when Joe was only known as Full Force Frank online. Full Force Frank was the zine world's most notorious publisher until his mysterious disappearance in late summer of 1991. In his zines, he promised to sometime this decade. In every issue of his popular zine, he ranted and raved about his plans. He was so determined and so outspoken about them that even the FBI came looking for him, or so he said. But he stopped publishing without warning 2 summers ago. What happened? Later, Jim explains that he was sent a Full Force Frank zine copy by Joe, who wanted Jim to review it. Jim read it and found it so disturbing he woke up screaming that night, stating Frank's zine was murder-obsessed. It was basically a how-to guide on some pretty messed up things. Soon after, Jim Romenesko sent a letter to Frank or Joe asking for his phone number to set up a possible interview. In response, Joe detailed a new problem of his. Quote, "I was looking forward to your review of my zine in Obscure, but in the past 2 weeks a major problem has surfaced. It's the FBI. Yes, the goddamned Federal Bureau of Investigation has discovered my zine, and they are f***ing me up majorly. Things are still not resolved, but it seems highly likely that my zine is soon to be dead. I guess it's time for me to go into deep cover, as the spies call it, sink underground along with my psychosis. I am not a regular publisher. I am in fact a psychopath, and if there is one thing that a psychopath does not need, it's to be harassed by the FBI." 2 weeks later, Jim receives yet another letter from Joe. "About 10 days ago, I sent you a letter advising you that my zine was dead, due to an FBI sting operation. Well, I've just spent the past 10 days talking to my lawyer and getting some legal information, and the bottom line is this. My zine is reborn. There are several changes. I have a new mailing address, and I now require a signed disclaimer before I will send anyone my zines." Jim states that Joe declined to give him his phone number and requested that he not write about him, though Jim said hell nah and posted them anyway. Joe ended up never contacting him again. Jim gave some more information about Joe, or Frank, that was never really known at this time. He was as a child by his father. Because of that, he claims I'm not reading that, or this. I'm not gonna go too much into what happened to Joe as a child yet, because we'll get into that soon. At the end of this page, Jim gives the thoughts of some select individuals on the truth behind Joe, or Full Force Frank, at the time. One person believes that Frank was a federal agent himself, working to catch people that get a little too into that kind of thing. Jim even got in contact with Mark Haynar 3 years before the 1996 film Affliction we talked about earlier. Haynar stated, "It's just my personal belief that he got sick of it all, and that he had too many contacts for his own good." The last person here to speak on the situation was Joe Valaquette, a media liaison officer for the FBI, who stated, "Our office has never had anything to do with him. This alone makes me think that Joe/Frank lied about his run-in with the FBI. It's possible that it did actually happen and Joe Valaquette either missed it or lied about it for whatever reason, though unfortunately that's all we know." So where is Joe1orbit today? It's been about 23 years since his departure from online forums, and basically nobody online nowadays knows about him or his story. Well, in 2017, hidden away in the depths of YouTube, a channel was created under the name The Seer of Forbidden Truth. With 3 videos and just over 53 subscribers, Joe makes his return.
Everyone who knows me through my work, my writings, my zines, my Usenet newsgroup postings from 15 years ago, my zines from 25 years ago, my current work, the Manifesto of Forbidden Truth. You all know what I am. I'm a victim. I am a victim creation of American society. That's what I am.
In his videos, he maintains his stances from earlier that he thinks humanity and society as a whole is evil. He also gives the reasoning behind him turning out this way. Joe was a by both of his parents. His father did things to him, and his mother essentially blinded him, while everyone around him ignored it, which led to him growing up and hating humanity. Joe goes much more in depth in these videos on his childhood and overall beliefs now, but knowing YouTube, I'd rather not include the much sadder and darker topics here. If you are interested in watching the rest, I'll link his channel in the description below. While at first glance this whole thing might seem fake or look like an act, I really don't believe any of it is fake. Nobody would spend over 30 years creating a character like Full Force Frank and Joe1orbit who have such extreme views, especially when there is zero incentive to do so. Joe himself hasn't made much money from all of this and only has a few donation links on some of his websites. With a relatively small fanbase now, and even back then, I just don't think this was ever just an act. The only piece of evidence that you could point to it all being fake is the FBI thing, which was denied by someone associated with the FBI. And even then, that's just one small piece of this giant rabbit hole. I'm pretty sure this has been one of the longest videos that I have ever posted. If you made it this far, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'm basically posting this right on my birthday, so it would mean a lot. And it really helps push my content out to people who have never had the absolute pleasure to watch my Christopher Nolan level videos.